My husband told me I should be grateful he didn't leave, then danced with my cousin at a wedding while calling her the prettier version of me. It happened at my brother's wedding, surrounded by everyone we knew. Trent didn't whisper it either. He said it loud enough that the bridesmaids heard, loud enough that my aunt pretended to cough to cover the awkward silence. I stood there in my dusty rose dress and watched him twirl Vanessa around the dance floor. His hand stayed too long on her waist. When she leaned in to whisper something in his ear, he threw his head back and grinned in a way he hadn't grinned at me in 4 years. That comment wasn't new. Trent had been comparing me to Vanessa since we started dating 6 years ago. She's always been the family beauty. Meanwhile, I got my dad's stocky build and my mom's acne scars. The criticisms started small after we got together. He'd suggest I try harder with my appearance. He'd buy me gym memberships for my birthday. When I confronted him, he said I was being insecure, that I should work on myself instead of tearing down other women. So I did. I lost 30 pounds. I learned makeup tutorials. I bought clothes I couldn't afford. And still, at this wedding, he told a room full of people that my cousin was the prettier version of me. My mom appeared at my elbow. She told me not to make a scene, that I knew how Trent gets when he's embarrassed. He was the one embarrassing me, but somehow I'd be the problem if I reacted. I walked outside to the garden. That's when my brother's best friend Hayes came out. We'd known each other since we were kids. He'd moved to Seattle after college. He sat down and told me he'd heard what Trent said, that he was sorry. I told him Trent says stuff like that all the time. Hayes said I shouldn't have to get used to it. Then he said I was always too good for Trent. Even back in high school. My phone exploded with texts. Trent looking for me, getting angry. I stood up, but Hayes caught my wrist. He said I didn't have to go back. I walked back inside anyway and found Trent with his arm around Vanessa's shoulders. When he saw me, he didn't remove his arm. After Vanessa left, he told me I'd embarrassed him, that everyone was asking where I went. I said he embarrassed me first. He told me to grow up and left to get another drink. Something inside me cracked, not broke, cracked open. And what was underneath wasn't sadness anymore. It was rage. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. I'd been adding money to savings for 3 years, small amounts he'd never notice. I had $8,400. Then I opened the job offer I'd received 2 weeks ago, a position in Portland. Better pay, better title. I turned it down because Trent said moving would be inconvenient. I hit reply and accepted. The hiring manager responded immediately. When could I start? I typed back 2 weeks. I found Hayes and asked about the job he'd mentioned at his tech company in Seattle, if it was still available. His eyes widened. Yeah, they never filled it. I told him I was moving in 2 weeks, leaving everything behind. He smiled and said he'd send me the job description. That Seattle's a good city for fresh starts. Then his expression shifted. He said there was something I should know first. Something about Trent and Vanessa. My phone rang. Trent. I declined and asked what about them. Hayes said he'd seen them together 3 months ago at that hotel downtown, the Riverside. If I was really leaving, I should know it wasn't just tonight. It had been going on for a while. Everything clicked into place. The way Vanessa always asked about Trent at family dinners. The way he always found excuses to give her rides home. I asked how long. Hayes said he didn't know for sure, but that wasn't the first time they'd met there. The desk clerk knew them both by name. The air left my lungs. I'd spent 6 years molding myself into someone Trent might actually love. 6 years of gym sessions and calorie counting and makeup tutorials. 6 years of swallowing his criticisms and believing I was the problem. And the entire time, he'd been sleeping with Vanessa. Hayes was still talking, but I couldn't hear him over the roaring in my ears. I walked back into the reception on autopilot. The DJ was playing something upbeat. People were laughing. My brother was feeding his new wife cake. Everything looked normal, like the world hadn't just tilted sideways. I found Trent at the bar. Vanessa was beside him again, her hand on his forearm. They were leaning close, sharing some private joke. When I approached, they didn't even have the decency to look guilty. I tapped Trent's shoulder. He turned with an annoyed expression already forming. I kept my voice calm and steady. I told him I knew about the Riverside, about the desk clerk who knew their names, about the 3 months, probably longer. His face went white, then red. Then he grabbed my arm hard enough to bruise and dragged me toward the coat check area, away from witnesses. Vanessa disappeared into the crowd like smoke. Once we were alone, Trent's mask dropped completely. He told me I was pathetic, that I'd always been pathetic, that Vanessa understood him in ways I never could. She didn't nag him about helping around the house or spending too much time at the gym. She didn't let herself go like I had. She made him feel like a man instead of a disappointing child. I stared at him. This person I'd married, this person I'd rearranged my entire life for, and I felt nothing. Not hurt, not anger, just a distant, clinical curiosity about how I'd wasted so much time. I told him I wanted a divorce. He laughed, actually laughed, said I wouldn't survive without him, that I had no job prospects, no savings, nowhere to go, that I should be grateful he was willing to work on our marriage despite my many flaws. I pulled out my phone and showed him the job offer acceptance, the Portland position. Then I told him about Seattle, about the $8,000 he didn't know existed, about the apartment I'd already started looking at online while he was dancing with Vanessa. His expression shifted through several emotions: disbelief, anger, something that might have been respect if he were capable of it. Then his eyes narrowed. He said I wasn't going anywhere, that he'd contest the divorce, drag it out for years, make sure I didn't get a penny. I told him he could try, but I'd already contacted a lawyer last week. After I found the hotel receipt in his jacket pocket, The one from the riverside dated 2 weeks ago. I'd been planning this longer than he thought. That was a lie. I'd found no receipt. But his face told me everything I needed to know. He grabbed for my phone, but I stepped back. People were starting to notice the commotion. My brother appeared, asking if everything was okay. Trent put on his charming smile. Everything was fine. Just a small disagreement. We'd talk about it at home. My brother looked uncertain but nodded and walked away. The second he was gone, Trent's smile vanished. He leaned close and hissed that if I tried to leave, he'd make sure everyone knew what a terrible wife I'd been, how I'd driven him to Vanessa with my insecurity and jealousy, how I'd ruined his life. I looked him in the eye and told him to do his worst. Then I walked away. I found my brother and his new wife and congratulated them again. I hugged my parents even though they'd watched Trent humiliate me and said nothing. I said goodbye to relatives I might never see again. And I left the reception without looking back. Hayes texted me 20 minutes later. He'd sent the Seattle job description. It was better than the Portland position. More money, better benefits, room for advancement. He added that his spare bedroom was available if I needed a place to stay while apartment hunting. I sat in my car in the parking lot and cried for the first time that night. Not because of Trent, but because after years of being told I was worthless, someone was offering me kindness without expecting anything in return. The next 2 weeks were a blur. I hired the lawyer I'd lied about having. She was sharp and efficient and made it clear that Trent had far more to lose than I did. I gave notice at my job. I started packing while Trent was at work, boxing up only the things that were truly mine. Trent tried everything. He apologized. He cried. He blamed me. He blamed Vanessa. He promised to change. He threatened to hurt himself if I left. When none of that worked, he tried to freeze our joint account. But I'd already moved my savings to a new bank. My family called constantly. My mom said I was being dramatic, that all marriages go through rough patches. My dad said I was giving up too easily. My aunt suggested couples therapy. Only my brother seemed to understand. He told me he'd seen the way Trent looked at Vanessa for years, that he should have said something sooner. Vanessa called too. She cried and said it was a mistake, that Trent had pursued her, that she'd tried to stop it but he was so persistent. I hung up without responding. I didn't have the energy to hate her. She could have Trent. They deserved each other. On my last day, I walked through our apartment one final time. It had never felt like home, just a place where I'd slowly erased myself trying to become someone Trent might love. I left my key on the counter and closed the door. The drive to Seattle took 14 hours. I'd packed everything I owned into my sedan and a small U-Haul trailer. Halfway there, Trent called. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. He was drunk, crying, saying he'd made the biggest mistake of his life, that he loved me, that Vanessa meant nothing, that he'd end things with her if I just came home. We could start over, have the family we'd always talked about, be happy. I told him I hoped he got help, that I hoped he figured out why he treated people the way he did. Then I told him not to call again and blocked his number. Hayes was waiting when I arrived at his apartment complex in Seattle. He helped me unload boxes, even though it was past midnight. His spare bedroom was small but clean, with a window that overlooked the city lights. He made tea, and we sat in his kitchen and talked until dawn. He didn't ask about Trent, didn't offer unwanted advice, just listened when I needed to talk and sat in comfortable silence when I didn't. Over the next few weeks, he showed me around Seattle, the good coffee shops and hiking trails and bookstores, places where I could start building a life that was entirely my own. The job was challenging but rewarding. My coworkers were friendly without being intrusive. I was good at the work in a way I'd never been good at anything before. Or maybe I'd always been good at things, but Trent had convinced me otherwise. I found an apartment after 6 weeks. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. I painted the walls colors I liked. I bought furniture that made me happy instead of furniture that fit some aesthetic Trent preferred. I adopted a cat from the shelter and named her something ridiculous that made me smile. 3 months after leaving, the divorce was finalized. Trent had tried to fight it, but his lawyer advised him to settle. Too much evidence of infidelity. Too many witnesses to his behavior at the wedding. I walked out of the courthouse feeling lighter than I had in years. That night, Hayes took me to dinner to celebrate. We went to a small Italian restaurant with checkered tablecloths and candles and wine bottles. Over pasta and too much wine, he told me he'd had feelings for me since high school, that he'd watched me choose Trent and had never understood why, that he'd moved to Seattle partly to get over me. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to jump into something new, to prove I could be wanted, to fill the empty space Trent had left. But a bigger part of me knew I needed time to figure out who I was without someone else defining me. I told Hayes I wasn't ready, that I might not be ready for a long time, that I needed to learn how to be alone before I could be with someone else. He nodded and said he understood, that he'd waited this long, he could wait longer, that my friendship was enough. We finished dinner and walked through the city, past glowing storefronts and street musicians and couples holding hands. Seattle felt alive in a way my old life never had, full of possibilities I hadn't known existed. 6 months after that, Vanessa called from a number I didn't have blocked. I almost hung up, but curiosity won. She was crying. Trent had proposed and she'd said yes, but something felt wrong. He criticized everything she did, compared her to other women, made her feel like she was never enough. Did I have any advice? I told her yes. Leave. Don't wait for it to get worse. Don't believe him when he says he'll change. Don't waste years of your life trying to fix someone who doesn't want to be fixed. Then I hung up and blocked the new number. I never found out if she took my advice. Part of me hoped she did. Part of me didn't care either way. Work promoted me after 8 months. More responsibility, significant raise, my own office with a view. I started taking art classes in the evenings, something I'd wanted to do since college, but Trent had said was a waste of time. Turned out I was decent at painting. Not amazing, but decent. And more importantly, it made me happy. Hayes and I grew closer. Slowly, carefully. We went hiking on weekends, cooked dinner together, watched terrible movies, and argued about plot holes. One night, after a particularly awful horror film, he kissed me. It was gentle and sweet, and nothing like kissing Trent had been. I kissed him back. We took things slow, painfully slow. I'd been burned badly enough that rushing into anything felt dangerous. Hayes never pushed, never pressured, just showed up consistently, day after day, being exactly who he said he was. A year after the wedding that changed everything, Hayes and I visited my brother. He'd just had a baby. When we walked in, my parents were there. So was my aunt. They stared at Hayes and me holding hands, at the way he pulled out my chair, at how he listened when I talked, at the way I smiled without effort. My mom pulled me aside later. She said she'd been wrong, that she should have said something at the wedding, that she'd watched me shrink for years and had convinced herself it was normal. That marriage required sacrifice. But seeing me now, she realized what she'd mistaken for sacrifice was actually just slow erasure. I told her I forgave her, and I meant it. Holding on to anger would only hurt me. Over dinner, my dad asked Hayes about his job, his intentions, whether he planned to marry me. Hayes looked at me before answering. He said that was up to me, that he'd be happy with whatever I wanted, marriage, commitment, or just seeing where things went. He was in no rush. My dad nodded slowly, said Hayes seemed like a good man, that he was glad I'd found someone who treated me right. It was the closest he'd come to apologizing, and I accepted it. That night, lying in Hayes's arms in his apartment, I thought about the past year, about the person I'd been at that wedding, broken and small and convinced I deserved Trent's treatment, and the person I'd become, strong and whole and finally understanding my own worth. The journey hadn't been easy. There were days I'd doubted everything, days I'd wondered if I'd made a terrible mistake leaving, days I'd felt so lonely I'd almost called Trent just to hear a familiar voice. But I'd pushed through, built a life I was proud of, became someone I actually liked. Hayes asked what I was thinking. I told him I was thinking about how grateful I was, for the wedding that broke me open, for his kindness when I needed it most, for the courage to leave when leaving felt impossible. He kissed my forehead and said I'd saved myself. He'd just been there to remind me I could. 2 years after leaving Trent, I got a message from Vanessa. She'd left him 6 months after their wedding, moved back home, started therapy. She wanted to apologize for everything, for the affair, for not standing up for me at the wedding, for all the times she'd made me feel small. I thought about ignoring it, but something made me respond. I told her I understood, that Trent was good at making people believe they deserved his treatment, that I hoped she was healing, that I forgave her. She asked if we could meet for coffee sometime. I said maybe. Not yet, but maybe someday. I needed to protect the peace I'd built. But I wasn't opposed to the possibility of forgiveness. Hayes proposed on a hiking trail overlooking Mount Rainier. No pressure. Just a simple question and a ring he'd clearly spent time picking out. Something elegant and understated. Nothing like the gaudy diamond Trent had chosen to show off. I said yes. Not because I needed to be married. Not because I was afraid of being alone. But because Hayes had proven over 2 years that he was a partner. Someone who lifted me up instead of tearing me down. Someone who celebrated my wins and supported me through losses. Someone who saw me as an equal. We got married in a small ceremony with close friends and family. My brother officiated. Hayes' sister was my maid of honor. We wrote our own vows about partnership and growth and choosing each other every day. There was no drama. No comparisons to prettier cousins. No moment where I felt small or inadequate. Just joy. At the reception, my mom pulled me aside. She was crying. She said she'd never seen me this happy. That she was sorry for all the years she'd watched me dim my light and said nothing. That she understood now what real love looked like. I hugged her and told her it was okay. That I'd needed to learn those lessons myself. That sometimes the hardest roads lead to the best destinations. My dad danced with me during the father-daughter dance. He told me he was proud, not for getting married, but for having the courage to leave when leaving was hard, for building a life on my own terms, for refusing to settle for less than I deserved. 3 years after that wedding where everything changed, I stood in my beautiful apartment with my husband and my cat, and my art hanging on the walls. I thought about the girl I'd been, the one who believed she wasn't pretty enough or thin enough or good enough, the one who'd twisted herself into shapes trying to earn love that was freely given elsewhere. And I was grateful to her, for surviving, for finally choosing herself, for taking that first terrifying step toward the door. Because that step had led me here, to a life I'd built from scratch, to a partner who saw me clearly and loved what he saw, to a version of myself I'd never known existed. Hayes came up behind me and wrapped his arms around my waist, asked what I was thinking about. I told him I was thinking about endings and beginnings, about how sometimes the worst moments crack us open just enough to let the light in. He kissed my neck and said he loved me. I said I loved him too, and I meant it in a way I'd never meant it before, with my whole heart, without reservation, without fear. My phone buzzed. A text from my brother. His wife was pregnant again. They wanted to know if Hayes and I would be godparents. I showed Hayes and we both grinned. We texted back yes immediately. That night, we made dinner together in our kitchen. chopped vegetables and told stories and laughed at inside jokes. The cat wove between our legs hoping for scraps. Music played softly from the speaker. Everything was ordinary and perfect. Later, curled up on the couch watching a movie neither of us were paying attention to, Hayes asked if I ever thought about Trent, if I wondered how he turned out. I considered the question honestly, then told him no. Not really. Sometimes I'd see something that reminded me of that time in my life, a song from that era, a restaurant we used to go to. But Trent himself had faded to background noise, a cautionary tale I'd tell younger women about recognizing red flags. Hayes nodded, said he'd seen Trent's social media recently. He'd remarried. Some woman who looked vaguely like Vanessa, who looked vaguely like me. Same pattern repeating. He asked if I wanted to see. I said no. That chapter was closed. I had no interest in reopening it. We finished the movie and went to bed. In the darkness, Hayes' breathing evened out into sleep. I lay awake a little longer, thinking about parallel lives. The one where I'd stayed with Trent, where I'd convinced myself his treatment was normal, where I'd slowly disappeared until nothing remained, and this life, the one I'd fought for, the one that had seemed impossible from inside my old existence, the one where I'd learned that being alone was better than being with someone who made you feel alone. I fell asleep grateful, for the wedding that broke me, for Hayes who helped me heal, for my own stubborn refusal to accept less than I deserved, for every hard choice that led me here. 4 years after leaving, I got news that Trent was getting divorced again. His second wife had left him after 18 months, cited emotional abuse and infidelity. I felt a pang of sympathy for her, for falling into the same trap I had, for believing she could fix him. But mostly I felt relief that I'd gotten out, that I'd recognized the pattern before it consumed me completely, that I'd chosen myself when choosing myself felt selfish and wrong. My therapist said that was growth, that recognizing my own worth wasn't selfish, that protecting my peace was necessary, that I'd done the hard work of healing and it showed. Hayes and I started talking about kids, whether we wanted them, when we might try, what kind of parents we'd be. The conversations were easy and honest, no pressure, no ultimatums, just two people discussing their future with genuine curiosity about what the other person wanted. We decided to wait another year, build our savings, travel a bit more, enjoy being just us for a while longer. There was no rush, we had time. I got another promotion at work, director level, managing a whole team, making decisions that affected the company direction. I was good at it, better than good. And people respected me not because I made myself small, but because I took up space confidently. On my lunch break one day, I scrolled through old photos on my phone, found pictures from that wedding 5 years ago. Me in the dusty rose dress looking strained and tired, Trent's arm around Vanessa, my family pretending not to notice. I almost deleted them, but something stopped me. These photos were proof, evidence of how far I'd come, a reminder that I'd survived something that had nearly destroyed me. I sent one to Hayes with the caption, "Look how far we've come." He responded immediately with a heart and, "You've always been beautiful, but now you glow." That night, we went to dinner at the Italian restaurant where he'd first told me he had feelings for me. Same checkered tablecloths, same candles and wine bottles, but everything else was different. I was different. Over wine, Hayes said he'd been thinking that maybe we shouldn't wait another year to try for kids, that he was ready if I was ready. I looked at him across the table, this man who'd never once made me feel small, who celebrated my successes without jealousy, who supported my dreams even when they diverged from his. I said, yes, let's try. Let's build something beautiful together. We spent the next few months preparing, got checkups, took vitamins, made our home safe for a potential baby, talked about names and schools and how we'd handle the hard parts of parenting. When I found out I was pregnant 6 months later, I cried, happy tears this time. Hayes held me and we both marveled at this life we'd created. This future we were building brick by brick. I called my brother first, then my parents. Everyone was thrilled. My mom cried and said she couldn't wait to be a grandmother. My dad said Hayes and I would make excellent parents. My brother joked that his kids needed cousins to play with. We told friends at a dinner party. Everyone cheered and hugged us and asked questions about due dates and gender and whether we'd picked names. It felt celebratory in a way my wedding to Trent never had. Genuine joy instead of obligation. During my pregnancy, I thought a lot about the kind of mother I wanted to be. The kind who showed up, who listened, who let her child be whoever they needed to be without trying to mold them into something else, who modeled healthy relationships and self-respect, and the courage to walk away when walking away was necessary. Hayes was anxious but excited. He read every parenting book, attended every appointment, built the crib and painted the nursery and picked out tiny clothes with reverence. He was going to be an amazing father. I knew it in my bones. Our daughter was born on a Tuesday morning in early spring. She was perfect, 10 fingers, 10 toes, a full head of dark hair. When they placed her in my arms, I felt something shift in my chest, a fierce protective love I'd never experienced before. Hayes cried when he held her, said she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. We named her something meaningful, but not too common, something strong. The first few months were hard. Sleepless nights and endless feedings and moments of doubt where I wondered if I was doing anything right. But Hayes was there through all of it, splitting duties, encouraging me, reminding me I was a good mother even when I felt inadequate. My mom came to visit and helped with the baby. She was a different grandmother than I expected, attentive and present and full of gentle advice. One night while Hayes was doing dishes and I was feeding the baby, she told me she was sorry for all the ways she'd failed me during my marriage to Trent, for not speaking up, for not protecting me. I told her I forgave her, that I'd already forgiven her, that holding on to anger would only poison the present. She hugged me carefully, mindful of the baby between us, and cried. When my daughter was 6 months old, Vanessa reached out again. She'd gotten engaged to someone new, someone kind. She wanted me to know she was happy, that she'd learned from her mistakes, that therapy had helped her understand why she'd made the choices she made. I was genuinely happy for her, told her I was glad she'd found peace. She asked about my life, and I told her. About Hayes and the baby and the career I loved, about the art classes and the hiking trips and the community I'd built. She said I sounded happy. I told her I was. Happier than I'd ever been. She said she was glad, that I deserved it, that she was sorry for all the pain she'd caused. We talked for an hour, really talked, about growth and healing and forgiveness, about the ways we'd both let Trent manipulate us, about the women we'd become since then. At the end, she asked if we could be friends again. Not right away, but eventually. I said eventually sounded good, that I needed more time, but I wasn't opposed to rebuilding something. We ended the call on good terms, both of us wiser than we'd been before. My daughter started sleeping through the night, started smiling and laughing and reaching for things. Every milestone felt like a miracle. Hayes and I marveled at her constantly, at how much personality she had for someone so small. Work gave me flexible hours after maternity leave, let me work from home a few days a week. I was productive and happy and more balanced than I'd been before. Turned out I could be a good mother and good at my job. The two weren't mutually exclusive like Trent had always implied they would be. On our daughter's first birthday, we threw a party. Friends and family filled our home. My brother's kids played with our daughter, sharing toys and making her giggle. My parents sat with Hayes' parents, swapping grandparent stories. Everything felt right. That night after everyone left, Hayes and I sat on the couch exhausted, but content. Our daughter was asleep in her crib. The house was a mess of wrapping paper and decorations. But it was a good mess. The mess of a life fully lived. Hayes asked if I was happy. I looked around our home, at the photos on the walls documenting our journey, at the art I'd made hanging in frames, at the baby monitor showing our daughter sleeping peacefully, at this man who'd loved me patiently while I learned to love myself. I told him I was happier than I ever thought possible, that this life we'd built exceeded every dream I'd had, that I was grateful every single day for the courage to leave when leaving felt impossible. He kissed me softly and said he was grateful too, for that wedding 5 years ago, for my bravery in walking away, for choosing to trust him, for building this beautiful life together. We went to bed early, knowing our daughter would wake us before dawn, but lying there in the darkness, Hayes' arm around me, I felt profound peace. The kind that comes from knowing you're exactly where you're supposed to be. 6 years after the wedding that changed everything, I ran into Trent at a conference for work. He was there representing his company. I was there presenting on a project my team had led. We stood in line for coffee and didn't recognize each other at first. Then our eyes met, and we both froze. He looked older, tired. The charm that had once captivated me now seemed forced and desperate. He asked how I'd been. I told him briefly. Married, baby, career. He said he'd heard, that mutual friends had mentioned it. He told me he was on his third marriage, that this one might actually last. He'd finally started therapy, working on his issues, learning about narcissistic patterns and emotional abuse. He said he was sorry, for everything, that he understood now why I left, that I'd been right to leave. I accepted his apology, told him I hoped therapy helped, that I genuinely wished him well. But I didn't ask for details about his life, didn't offer mine. We were strangers now, connected only by a shared past neither of us wanted to revisit. My presentation went well. I answered questions confidently, joked with the audience, commanded the room in a way I never could have 6 years ago. Afterward, colleagues congratulated me, asked about my methodology, wanted to collaborate on future projects. I flew home that evening feeling validated, not because Trent had seen my success, but because I'd faced my past without flinching, without shame, without any desire to return to who I'd been. Hayes picked me up from the airport with our daughter. She shrieked with joy when she saw me, reaching her pudgy arms out. I held her close and kissed Hayes and felt overwhelmingly grateful for this life, for these people who loved me unconditionally. That weekend we went hiking as a family. Our daughter rode in a carrier on Hayes' back, pointing at birds and clouds and trees with delight. We stopped at a viewpoint overlooking the city, the place where Hayes had proposed. He asked if I remembered. I said, of course. How could I forget? He said sometimes he still couldn't believe this was real, that I'd chosen him, that we'd built this beautiful life together. I told him I couldn't believe it either, but in the best way. That every day I woke up grateful, that I'd never take this for granted, that I knew how rare it was to find someone who truly saw you and loved what they saw. We kissed while our daughter babbled happily behind us. Below, the city stretched out endless and bright, full of possibility, full of hope, full of people living their own complicated lives and fighting their own battles. 7 years after leaving Trent, my brother called. He'd run into Vanessa at a restaurant. She was married now, looked happy and healthy. She'd asked about me, wanted to know if I'd be open to meeting for coffee. I thought about it for a few days, talked it through with Hayes and my therapist, examined my motivations, made sure I was doing it for the right reasons, not out of obligation or guilt, but genuine curiosity about rebuilding something. I agreed to meet her at a neutral coffee shop. We were both nervous at first, made small talk about work and weather and traffic. Then slowly, carefully, we started talking about real things, about our respective journeys, about the therapy we'd both done, about the women we'd become. She showed me photos of her husband. He looked kind. She talked about him with genuine affection, how he supported her goals, how they communicated openly, how different it was from her relationship with Trent. I showed her photos of Hayes and our daughter, told her about my career and the art classes and the life I'd built. She said I looked happy, really happy. Not the fake happiness I'd performed during my marriage to Trent, but something real and bright. We talked for 3 hours. By the end, some of the old warmth had returned, not the same as before. We'd both changed too much, but something new, something healthier. We agreed to do it again. Maybe bring our spouses next time. Build a friendship based on who we were now, not who we'd been. Walking to my car afterward, I felt lighter. Like I'd closed a chapter that had been left hanging open. Vanessa and I would never be close like we'd been as kids. But we didn't have to be enemies either. We could be two people who'd survived the same storm and found our way to calmer waters. That night, I told Hayes about the coffee date. He listened carefully, asked thoughtful questions. Never once seemed threatened or jealous. That's how I knew I'd found the right person. Someone secure enough to let me have complicated relationships with complicated people. Our daughter started talking more. Full sentences. Observations about the world that delighted us constantly. Hayes said she had my eyes and my stubborn determination. I said she had his kindness and his patient heart. We marveled at this little person we'd created, at the ways she was already wholly herself. Work continued going well. I got offered a VP position at a different company. More money, more responsibility, more flexibility. Hayes and I discussed it thoroughly, ran the numbers, considered the trade-offs. I accepted the offer and gave notice. My last day at my current company was bittersweet. I'd grown so much there, built confidence and skills and friendships, but it was time to move forward, to take the next step, to keep building. The new job was challenging, but rewarding. My team respected me. My boss valued my input. I had a voice that mattered. Sometimes I'd sit in meetings and marvel at how different my life was, how far I'd come from the woman who'd let her husband tell her she wasn't enough. 8 years after that wedding, my brother got divorced. His wife had been having an affair for 2 years. He called me devastated and broken, asked how I'd survived it, how I'd moved forward, how I'd learned to trust again. I told him the truth, that it was hard, that some days I'd wanted to give up, that I'd questioned everything about myself and my judgment, but that I'd done the work, therapy and time and radical self-honesty, that I'd learned to be alone before I tried to be with someone else. He asked about Hayes, how I'd known he was different. I told him I hadn't at first, that I'd been terrified, but that Hayes had been patient, had shown me through consistent action that he was trustworthy, that love didn't have to hurt. My brother cried, said he didn't know how to be alone, didn't know who he was without his wife. I told him that was okay, that the not knowing was part of the process, that he'd figure it out, that I'd help him however I could. Over the next year, I watched my brother rebuild himself. He went to therapy, started working out, picked up old hobbies he'd abandoned. Slowly, painfully, he became himself again, a better version, more aware, more careful, more whole. He started dating someone new, someone kind who treated him well. He introduced us at a family dinner. She was warm and genuine and clearly cared about him. Hayes and I approved. My brother looked happy, really happy, the kind that comes from healing. Our daughter started preschool. She made friends easily, came home with stories and artwork and new words. She was thriving. Hayes and I congratulated ourselves on not completely screwing up parenting. It was harder than anything either of us had done, but also more rewarding. We started talking about a second child, whether we wanted one, whether our daughter wanted a sibling, whether we had the energy for another round of sleepless nights and endless feedings. We decided to try. If it happened, great. If not, our family was already complete. I got pregnant again when our daughter was 4, another girl. We were thrilled. Our daughter was excited to be a big sister. She helped pick out baby clothes and furniture and names. She took her role seriously. The second pregnancy was easier than the first. I knew what to expect, had systems in place, wasn't as anxious about every little thing. Hayes was calmer too. We'd done this before. We could do it again. Our second daughter was born on a Sunday afternoon in late summer. She looked nothing like her sister. Light hair, different features, but just as perfect. Our family felt complete in a way I hadn't known we'd been missing something. The early months were chaos. 2 kids under 5, both needing different things. Some days I wanted to cry from exhaustion, but Hayes was there, splitting duties, taking night shifts, reminding me we were doing great even when it felt like we were barely surviving. My mom helped when she could. My brother brought meals, friends offered to babysit. We accepted help without guilt, let people in, built a community that supported us. 9 years after leaving Trent, I heard he'd gotten sober. His 4th marriage had ended, and he'd finally hit bottom. Went to rehab, started actually doing the work, reached out to people he'd hurt to make amends. He sent me a letter, a real letter, handwritten, pages long. He took full responsibility for his behavior. Didn't make excuses, didn't blame me for any of it. Just acknowledged the harm he'd caused and apologized sincerely. He said he didn't expect forgiveness, just wanted me to know he understood now, that he was sorry, that I'd deserved so much better. I read the letter multiple times, showed it to Hayes and my therapist. They both said I could respond or not respond. Whatever felt right. I thought about it for weeks. What I wanted to say. What would be healing versus what would be reopening wounds. Finally, I wrote back, kept it brief, told him I appreciated the apology, that I forgave him, not for his sake but for mine, that holding on to anger had only hurt me, that I hoped he continued his recovery, that I wished him well but had no interest in further contact. I mailed the letter and felt relief. Another chapter closed. Another piece of my past put to rest. 10 years after the wedding that changed everything, Hayes and I renewed our vows. Not because we needed to, but because we wanted to celebrate a decade of growth and partnership and choosing each other every day. We had a small ceremony in our backyard, just family and close friends. Our daughters were flower girls, throwing petals with gleeful abandon. My brother officiated again. Everyone cried happy tears. In my vows, I talked about the journey, about the woman I'd been 10 years ago, broken and lost and convinced she deserved mistreatment, about the path to healing, about Hayes' patience and kindness, about building a life beyond my wildest dreams. In his vows, Hayes talked about watching me bloom, about being honored to witness my transformation, about loving me not despite my scars but because of them, because they proved my strength, because they made me who I was. After the ceremony, we danced in our backyard as the sun set. Our daughters danced too, spinning and laughing. Our families and friends celebrated with us. Everything felt perfect. Not in a fake Instagram way, but in a deeply real way. The kind of perfect that comes from years of hard work and genuine connection. That night, after everyone left and the girls were in bed, Hayes and I sat on our porch. 10 years. A decade of marriage, of partnership, of building something beautiful together. He asked if I'd ever imagined this life when I left Trent. I told him no, that I'd barely been able to imagine surviving the next day, that this life exceeded anything I dreamed possible, that I was grateful every single day for the courage to leave, for his patience while I healed, for every choice that led us here. He said he was grateful too, for that wedding where everything changed, for my bravery in choosing myself, for trusting him with my heart, for being his partner in building this life. We sat in comfortable silence, holding hands, watching stars appear in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the house, our daughters were sleeping. Somewhere in the city, people were living their own complicated lives, making hard choices, learning hard lessons, growing in ways they couldn't yet imagine. I thought about sending a message to my younger self, the one standing at that wedding in the dusty rose dress, humiliated and broken. I'd tell her it gets better, that the pain is temporary, but the strength is permanent, that leaving feels impossible until you do it, that there's a whole life waiting on the other side of fear, that she's stronger than she knows, braver than she feels, more worthy than anyone has told her. I'd tell her to hold on, to take the first step even when every step after is unclear, to trust that she'll figure it out. Because she will. Because she does. Because 10 years later, she'll be sitting on a porch with a man who truly loves her, with children who call her mama, with a career she's proud of, with art on her walls and peace in her heart. I'd tell her the wedding that breaks her is also the wedding that saves her. That sometimes we have to shatter completely to rebuild ourselves into something stronger. That the cracks are where the light gets in. But I can't send that message. So instead, I hold Hayes' hand and watch the stars and feel profound gratitude for every painful step that led me here. To this porch, this life, this moment, this beautiful, hard-won, deeply earned happiness.